Welcome to Matters Financial, Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. Let me start with a very engaging lunch that I attended yesterday with David Lipton, the IMF, who was visiting with us, a few other folks. Very interesting and insightful, broad sweep of the world economy without a single note. And a deep dive into sub-Saharan Africa. So I thank the IMF and David for that. David was very forthright on the $1.5 billion precautionary facility, saying it was a unique program. And there was an interesting discussion around the Eurobond. And David said, look, we can't get into something that's political. But from an economic point of view, he confirmed that all the money came back. And then early this morning it was an absolute pleasure interviewing Deloitte Digital Africa leader, Mr. Adao. And that interview we'll be publishing, I hope, pretty soon. And if you haven't seen our MindSpeak panel discussion, then please take a look, because that was pretty good as well. Bob Diamond saying it's a great time to invest in Africa. There are headwinds from commodities and international banks pulling out. However, he said this is a great time to be investing because the prices of businesses, in our case of banks, are lower. Currency levels versus the dollar and other major currencies are also at a good level. So we see this as a time to invest, he says. Home thoughts, I'm reading The War of the End of the World by Mario Vargas Llosa. I discovered him quite recently and I've now ordered all his books because they're just so remarkable. New York Times speaking to this book, Revolution as Ritual. Mario Vargas Llosa's powerful and haunting historical novel, The War of the End of the World, based on events in South America at the end of the 19th century, succeeds brilliantly in penetrating and opening to examination the ancient significance of the millenarian myth. As the century's final decade comes to a close, a mysterious figure, bearded, rail-thin, clad in a purple tunic, appears in the Tower. He speaks of love, peace, and repentance. He speaks of death and judgment, heaven and hell. The stranger's name is Antonio Consolero, and he's known to his followers as the Counselor. It's easier to imagine the death of one person than those of 100 or 1,000. When multiplied, suffering becomes abstract. It's not easy to be moved by abstract things. And then, yet, my dear Estella, in the end one accepts the will of God, resigns oneself, and discovers that even with all its calvaries, life is full of beautiful things. Time, Rodrigo Duterte is tipped for the presidency as the Philippine votes. He's won now. Look at this photograph of 700,000 in Philippines turning out for likely new next President Duterte. Another sort of Donald Trump type figure. Populism is obviously working very well all over the world. A US Navy warship carried out a freedom of navigation operation near a disputed reef in the South China Seas on Tuesday. The US Department of Defense said the operation near the Chinese-occupied Fiery Cross Reef was to challenge excessive maritime claims of some claimants of the South China Sea. One senses that the Chinese will just ignore this. The issue is, I think it remains a tinderbox, but I think the US is going to have to put up a little bit more. Yemen under siege is a documentary I've been watching by PBS, very interesting. Let's move on to international markets. Credit Suisse posted its second consecutive loss quarter after a tumultuous start to the year, leading to further write-downs. Have a look, because Holger's put a list of the banks, give you an idea of the types of returns we've seen. Let's move on to the currency markets and see what's happening there. Euro dollar 113.92, dollar index 94.22, Japanese yen 108.84, backing up a little bit as the yen, Swissy 0.9720, the pound 144.28, The Aussie is at 0.7342, India rupee 66.725, South Korean won 1173.28, the Rial 351.62, Egyptian pound 887.83, and the Rand above 15.1796. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. Although we violated that key area just below 93, we're back above it at 94 and change. And it seems to me that the dollar rally remains intact until we see a breakdown below 93 and a close or a couple of closes below that level. Commodity markets, gold 1266.65 this morning. We've backed off 1300. I think we'll hold above 1250 before we launch ourselves back above 1300. Crude oil had a tough session yesterday after being up over 2%. I'll put a 1-year chart. I'm still basically bearish. I think the price is going lower. I think we're going to see the Saudis unload more supply. Singapore iron futures dropped below $50 a ton, the first time since March. Of course, we had this huge rally in iron ore, but that was largely seen as speculative by most, including Rio Tinto themselves. The man who foresaw the oil crash bets against Saudi Arabia. Saudi has 2 to 3 years of runway before it hits a wall, Schreiber said. Predicted that Saudi Arabia will be structurally insolvent by that point because it faces the twin threats of huge spending commitments and cheap oil. No wonder they're now issuing tons of debt. Saudi Arabia's central bank is sitting on almost $600 billion, a massive rainy day fund that is helping it cope with the financial storm. But the Saudis have burned through $140 billion between the end of 2014 and February. The IMF too recently warned the Saudis could eventually run out of cash. Schreiber argues that Saudi Arabia's balance sheet is overstated and misunderstood. He points to nearly $340 billion of liabilities that minimize the size of that rainy day fund. Concerns may help explain why the Saudis are planning to sell off a 5% stake in the country's crown jewel, the Aramco. If they sell the golden goose, how do they fund anything? It's insane. Saudi is mortgaging away its future to buy time. Let's hope for the best and hedge for the worst, he says. Put up a photograph of the custodian of the 2 holy mosques, King Salman, arriving in Jeddah. Coming to Africa, Congo opposition leader faces mercenary charges. Backers cry foul. This is Moishi Katumbi. A question on Monday over government allegations he hired mercenaries in a plot against the state, a case that could halt his fledgling campaign. Police fired tear gas at thousands of supporters who were advancing on the Prosecutor General's office where he was being questioned, chanting "President," a Reuters witness said. Some entered the building and at least 4 were arrested. After Katumbi emerged from the building, police made further arrests and again fired tear gas at the crowd. Katumbi's supporters said the allegations are aimed at disrupting his campaign to succeed President Joseph Kabila, who has ruled since 2001 but is barred from standing for a 3rd term. For elections set for November, there has been much work on these elections, I must admit. The tricks continue in this trial of shame. This is Katumbi's chief advisor, Solomon Idi Kalondadela. And then have a look at this video that Hervé posted. Image impressionnante du Palais de Justice de Lumumbashi. And this is as you see the crowd and increasingly looking at the numbers, President Kabila is being faced with a formidable foe, I think. African growth story is still on the move, says Dominic Barton. I think it's Dominic of McKinsey. Africa achieved average real annual GDP growth of 5.4% between 2000 and 2010, adding $70 billion annually in GDP in 2015 prices, but growth slowed to 3.3%, or $69 billion a year between 2010 and last year. McKinsey is saying that the shine has not come off Africa's growth story, it has become more nuanced. The deceleration in growth since 2010 has been concentrated in two groups of economies, oil exporters and northern countries, rebuilding after the political convulsions of the Arab Spring. The economies of Egypt, Libya, Tunisia did not grow at all between 2010 and last year. Rate of growth among oil exporters such as Algeria, Angola, Nigeria and Sudan fell sharply to 4% from 7.1%. Between 2010 and 2014, services generated 48% of Africa's GDP growth, up from 44% in the preceding decade. Growth in Africa's manufacturing sector has been low at 4.3% a year between 2010 and 2014. In the long term, three powerful positive trends are likely to sustain Africa's growth. First, its young population and growing labour force, if you can find them jobs. Second, Africa is still urbanizing and much of the economic benefit lies ahead. Third, projecting Africa's consumers will spend $2 trillion by 2025. Nigerian consumers alone may account for up to 30% of Africa's consumption growth in the next decade. Saying that East Africa is a global leader in mobile payments, penetration of smartphones is expected to hit 50% in 2020. FDI reached $73 billion in 2014, up from $14 billion in 2004. Africa has 700 large and increasingly Pan-African companies earning revenues of more than $500 million. These companies together boast $1.4 trillion in revenues, and many continue to grow very fast. Undoubtedly, policymakers, and this is the big issue because many are making mistakes, will need to grapple with significant challenges ahead. About 1/5 of Africa's GDP comes from countries we call growth stars with high rates of growth and high score on stability. These countries, among them Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Kenya, Morocco and Rwanda, not dependent on resources for growth. The second group, unstable growers that account for 43% of Africa's GDP, experienced high growth rates in the past 5 years, but achieved lower scores on stability. This group of countries includes Angola, the DRC, Nigeria, and Zambia. Slow growers that accounted for 38% of GDP last year, including South Africa, Madagascar, Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia. Le Monde Afrique is saying that Rwanda is using drones to distribute medicine. I like this quote from BT on a Facebook post. Perhaps the burning question of the day is why has the regime embarked on such a bizarre and reckless act? The answer is that the regime has run out of options. This is the Zimbabwe bond notes. Have a look at Renaissance FX forecast that I got from Charlie Robertson via email. Current FX rates, their model, which is looking at the fair value. It's very, very informative. Uganda confines opponents ahead of Museveni's swearing in. Uganda's main opposition party said one of its senior officials is missing and the homes of its leaders were surrounded by security forces 3 days before Yoweri Museveni sworn into office. I think they want all of us put out of circulation as part of their swearing-in preparations. South Africa's President Zuma says the economy is weathering the storm. Q1 unemployment was the highest on record. South African all shares up 1.29% this year. Dollar rand back above 15.1796. South Africa's top anti-graft official fears for her life. On the 1st of April, she received a text message from an informant, and that informant warned her to be careful. That person said a top gangster in the Western Cape was paid to get a hitman to kill her. Egyptian EGX30 up 9.14% this year, and I think the only bull market in Africa. Nigerian all-share down 9.82% year to date. Ethiopia is boiling, says the rebel group's founder, and warning of a new Arab Spring. After 30 years of unsuccessful protests, even violence, Abdi Rahman Mahdi, the Ogaden National Liberation Front's foreign secretary and founding member, is warning of an Arab Spring-style insurrection in Ethiopia. Ghana Stock Exchange down 9.14%. I like this emerging skateboard scene in Ethiopia. Bloomberg is saying Africa's would-be Switzerland flaunts its economic prowess more than 2 decades on from a genocide. Rwanda is taking another step forward, looking like the closest thing Africa has to Switzerland, a tiny, landlocked, mountainous nation. Economy has outperformed almost all its continental peers, with annual growth averaging 7.8% since 2000. Like Switzerland, which hosts the World Economic Forum in Davos every year, it's also about to welcome delegates to the organization's annual African gathering. The CEO of KCB, Rwanda, says the government has a good PR machine. Investment returns continue to be attractive. I'll put up a photograph of Paul Kagame. Mozambique's fallout from the credit boom is an article in the FT. In the annals of financial wizardry, McGregor has a special place. The 19th century Scots adventurer conjured up the fictional state of Poyais and made a fortune selling bonds on its behalf. Mozambique is a different prospect, but the same impulse that drove British investors to plough savings into Poyais has propelled Maputo's tuna bond fiasco. The paper McGregor hawked in the 1820s promised 6% returns when the British equivalent offered 3%. Yields in frontier markets like Mozambique have proved equally alluring during the recent trough in developed market rates. And then talking about what we already know about. Put up a photograph of Maputo from the sea. Kenya, Daily Nation update reports of theft of mobile phones and other valuables as anti-IEBC demo passes along Moi Avenue. This is regarding the credibility of the IEBC and the opposition's EFF-style responses. World Bank Kenya said a lower oil price is the main contributor to improving current account. Kenya, and I was speaking about this on the 11th of January when I said there's a massive trend change occurring in front of our eyes in what was a previously intractable problem, the perennial current account deficits. And I was also speaking about why the shilling was strong. The weather is a wild card was my piece over the weekend. Uganda orders have boosted Kenyan businesses after poll-linked slowdown. This is a report out of CFC Stanbic saying there's been a good rebound in orders out of Uganda. KenGen has disclosed the terms of the rights issue, offering 4,396,722,912 new ordinary shares at 6 shillings and 55 cents. Shareholders will have the right to subscribe for 2 new ordinary shares for every 1 ordinary share held on the register on Monday the 16th of May. Government of Kenya will take up their full entitlement. Commencement of trading in nil-paid rights is the 23rd of May. Last date for trading in nil-paid rights, 3rd of June. Rights issue closing date, 10th of June. Press announcement of rights issue results, 1st of July. Listing and commencement of trading in new shares at the NSE on the 6th of July 2016. There is a link there for the share price, last trading at 8 shillings. I checked just now and it's trading down 50 cents last time I checked. I did an interview with Albert Mugo, the MD and CEO of KenGen, straight after the first half results. Do take a look at that. Have a look at his Mindspeak presentation as well. I'll be attending the full year earnings release of Safaricom tomorrow, just before the market opens. Obviously, that's going to be the big bellwether. It's the big bellwether stock of the stock market. How it performs will set the tone for the stock market. If you're interested in having a look at the share price, take a look at it. It's up about just under 4% year to date. I expect good results and a handsome dividend to propel it to fresh all-time highs. Kenya shilling at a 9-month high, 100.551. Nairobi all share minus 0.04% year to date. NSE 20 minus 1.93% year to date. Once again, thank you kindly for stopping.